What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another amazing episode of Culture FC, the weekly soccer show that's not really about soccer. We cover music, we cover fashion, we cover fan culture, we cover politics, we cover all of the things happening off of the pitch, just none of the stuff happening on it. My name is Louie, and I'm joined here with my two amazing co-hosts, Alan and Brendan. And this week, we got to talking about NASL. What is NASL? NASL is the North American Soccer League, and since 2011 they have operated essentially as the second division within American soccer. They took their name from the original North American Soccer League, which was the Division I league back in the 70s, which was, the league that had Pele, Franz Beckenbauer, Johan Cruyff, George Best, all of these amazing players who came to play in the U.S. They essentially took that name and tried to adopt the heritage. Unfortunately, their future is a little uncertain, and we kind of dove into why that is, their issues with the MLS, and kind of a little bit of what's going to happen with them going forward. As always, don't forget to leave us that 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We really appreciate it. Those reviews mean the world to us. They help us rank better on Google Play and iTunes, which gets more listeners, and it just helps us in the long run. So we appreciate it if you could do that. You can also find us on Instagram at culturef.c, or you can follow our clothing brand at Troublewear on Instagram as well. The three of us have a soccer-inspired fashion clothing brand. If you have someone that you know that loves soccer that would enjoy this podcast, we ask that you share it with them, because the more people listening, the better it is for us, the better we can get at this, and the better content we can bring to you. While watching or listening to this episode, if you have any comments, do you think we missed something out? Did we mess something up? Leave it in the comments below. We're very active in answering any questions, comments, concerns in the comments. If you're more of a listener and not a watcher, you can always email us at contact@troublewear.com. That is TREBLWEAR.com. So that's enough of my rambling. Let's jump into this week's episode.
You know what's weird? I feel like this time of the year, normally you're like kind of wrapping up with soccer, like seasons are getting to a close, all the cup finals are starting to happen, but we still got a lot of soccer to go.
There's a lot of drama this year.
Yeah, it's been very dramatic.
Well, the funny thing that I think is a lot of the main leagues around Europe have kind of already basically wrapped up. City's champion of England, Bayern's champion of Germany.
Who saw that one coming?
In Spain, it's a little bit more iffy, but you know Barcelona's going to win it. They haven't lost a single game.
Italy. Did you see the
That's
Napoli
the one.
game versus Juventus?
That's the one that I was going to say next, is the fact that Italy, a couple weeks ago, everyone was already writing off Napoli because there was I think it was 6-point gap or a 4-point gap.
Yeah.
And there was only a few more games to go. But then, this past weekend, the fact that Napoli were able to pull out that win was crazy.
Yeah, within 1 point now, dude. That is crazy.
Within 1 point with 3 games to go.
I mean, they let it slip though. They were in the lead by 3 points at 1 point, 6 points.
But it's almost their fault. They were in the lead, like
I know.
you said. They let it slip. Everyone's kind of on the internet. I've been watching a lot of people are just like, "Let's go Napoli," because they're so sick of Juventus winning every fucking year. Because since Juventus has come up from the second division, they spent a couple of years not being too great, and they've won 6 in a row now.
Yeah,
I think. So it's like
stupid.
That's crazy.
Same thing in Germany. It's like the last time Dortmund won was like I feel like it was just yesterday, but it's been like 6-7 seasons.
Yeah.
So
Bayern's
just been winning uncontrollably.
Yeah, there's a big disparity in quality in those leagues, unfortunately. But I'd love to. Dude, it'd just be nice to see some competition there.
I know.
In Spain, at least you get 2.
At least you have 2. In England, you got 4 or 5.
Yeah. Germany, it's just there's just no competition.
It's the same thing every year. Like last year when I was talking to Egg last night. Last year, Leipzig did really well. Got second. We're looking real good. This year, Leipzig is 6th. They just fell apart.
And out of all of the world fans that kind of support teams, the German league has some super loyal fans. In terms of fanmanship, but also just kind of atmosphere. So I really think they deserve a little better than what they're getting.
It'd be so much better if Bayern didn't win every year. Look, not knocking Bayern, they're phenomenal, but goddamn, do they really have to win every year? It's just not as fun,
Yeah.
But that being said, all the drama in Europe is crazy.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the 3 topics. start this off, get into the podcast. I'm going to start off with something a little dark. You two may have seen it already, but Liverpool-Roma game. Great game to watch, but
result.
Stuff happening off the pitch that was not so great.
Which directly ties into last week's episode.
Yes. So, anyone, if you haven't heard of this yet, but before the match, there was some activity, some violence. One man actually got stabbed. 2 men arrested. There are videos circulating online with a man with a hammer hitting people. I mean, just like all-out brawl anarchy. Is
and this is
pretty
right outside
ugly.
Anfield.
Yeah, right outside the stadium. So, it's kind of disgusting. I mean, you don't want to see people walking around with weapons and shit, and especially after the talks we had on the hooliganism. And it's a stark contrast to kind of when Liverpool had this great atmosphere before the Man City game. You know, they were kind of being lauded for that, and setting a great atmosphere. This was definitely not what you want to see.
It's so funny the stark differences between that Man City and Liverpool game where, yes, the Liverpool fans were rowdy and they were kind of like, in the video you can kind of see some people throw some stuff at a bus, but it wasn't of substantial amount. It was just, it was rowdy and intimidating.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I wouldn't call that violent.
And it was more fan against a bus.
Right.
Here it was more fan against fan, which...
This was like several brawls and fights that happened before and after the game right outside of Anfield.
Yeah.
And the fact that you had a guy walking around with a hammer, and there's a video of this on YouTube, it just goes to show what we were talking about last week. Hooliganism is not dead.
No, and actually Roma have done this a couple other times. So their fans stabbed 6 Liverpool supporters in 2001.
Yeah.
Then targeted Middlesbrough fans in 2006, Manchester United 2007, Arsenal in 2009, and Chelsea's last year.
So they're notorious for this. Like, I was reading kind of just Twitter, and a lot of the Manchester United accounts I follow were just like, yeah, we're not surprised at all. Like these guys, they from going to Roma to watch United play against Roma, they're just like, we have to wait and see what happens in the second leg because there's gonna be blood on the streets.
That's crazy.
Just not something you want.
Oh man,
I can't imagine what's gonna happen next week. Though.
That is scary.
Their team's down 5-2, and
I bet their supporters are probably gonna be.
Yeah, that's that thing. Like, okay, well, I gotta set the tone outside of the pitch. I'll let you guys know that we're here.
We're
ready
not
to
gonna
die.
Fuck around.
That's terrifying.
You ready to die, clowns?
Yeah.
That's so terrifying. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
not great.
Dude,
But
put your hammer away.
Yeah, like last week when I did say I was for hooliganism. It wouldn't be there without the great sportsmanship and the fans and everything. But I wouldn't condone bringing hammers or any weapons to any games.
And I don't think they know yet if the hammer guy was a Liverpool or Roma fan. But obviously the people that were arrested, they're probably questioning them and going through all that.
In that video where the guy's getting his ass beat in the street, there's one cop making sure that the one guy isn't dead, but then there's 7 or 8 guys beating the shit out of each other right behind this cop. And I'm thinking man, if there's a cop there and he can't disperse a fight, something has
just too many
to be,
people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just overpowering.
Yeah.
I used to, when I was a kid and I would watch soccer, I'd be like, why are there so many police officers at games in England? I didn't get it when I was younger. Now, clearly I understand it, but
Yeah, even then, those guys, there's really just all for show because those cops can't stop shit either in a stadium where if everyone is just like, yeah, let's go run on the field.
They're always out.
Those cops are not stopping
times.
anything. Yeah, unfortunate. But all right, let's move into something a little. I think this is more funny, less dark. Definitely less dark. No dark in the remaining 2 topics. But Manchester United game versus Tottenham. We all know the result. If you don't, not going to bring it up. What was funny after this was the reaction on Twitter. The English FA's Twitter account actually tweeted something, and it was like a meme, and it was what they did was there was an old video of Chris Smalling, and the caption was me, Chris, what's in your pocket? And then it goes Chris, and then it plays the video, and then the video is Chris Smalling saying Harry Kane. So super funny, from United fan. I thought this was really great, them kind of making fun of Harry Kane, but they got a ton of backlash, so much, because you have to think about it. That's their kind of golden boy, and there was even an article that came out saying like Harry Kane is our golden boy. He should not be the butt of any joke coming from his own federation. So the FA kind of throughout this backlash came out and was like, "We're sorry, Harry Kane." Blah 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 blah. I kind of wanted to get your opinion on this though, because it's different, right? Like imagine if the CBF came out and made a meme about Neymar after him losing something, right? Or, the U.S. men's national team Twitter account making a meme about Christian Pulisic after having a bad game. I thought it was funny, but I can see why people would be like, don't make fun of your own star player.
This kind of brings it back to the whole Arsenal fan TV thing, like Hector Bellerin coming out and being like, "Come on, like don't hurt. It's too bad." It's like, come on, really? Like if you're a professional athlete, I get it's your own federation, but like, come on, banter.
I don't know if it's necessarily against Harry Kane, because I don't think he complained about it. What I see it as is, why is the FA making jokes like that? I don't think they're in a place.
It's 2018, dude.
I get it. They're trying to be funny. They're trying to stay relevant by making Twitter memes and all. But at the same time, it's just like, I don't think the FA should be. The FA shouldn't be making jokes.
Where do you draw the line though? Because like I personally like that like team Twitter accounts are. They know the platform and they know that like Twitter kind of lives off of this meme culture type of thing. So I personally even other accounts like Arsenal Twitter account is really good at it. Roma's Twitter account is awesome at the memes. Where do you draw the line?
I think that a club talking about itself is one thing. I think that Bayern has, in my personal opinion, Bayern has the best Twitter account.
Yeah, Bayern's
Twitter account is hilarious. Roma's probably second for me in terms of hilarity. But I think that when you're supposed to be an impartial organization, you're supposed to be impartial, you're supposed to be very neutral. You're supposed to be like the UN, right? You're supposed to be like this thing where you cater to everybody. You shouldn't be getting involved. I think that's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
I think that if a club makes fun of someone, go for it.
Yeah.
You want to make fun of another team, by all means, keep it going. It's hilarious. But in terms of the FA, it's like they're supposed to be impartial. And people already bitch and moan about how United gets referee calls. They used to talk about Howard Webb essentially being a part of Manchester United. Like all these jokes about Manchester United. So it's like when you're the FA tweeting slandering Harry Kane and Tottenham using Chris Smalling, it's hilarious, but it's also doesn't really help the cause of United is the FA darling, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And
I definitely think in terms of you don't want to create a rift in your own national team, and especially like Chris Smalling. He's already what's their manager? What's his name? Gareth Southgate has already said Chris Smalling will not be playing for them. So like. Because he wants ball playing center backs, and then so him and Chris Smalling actually have some bad history, but to kind of make a meme about a guy that's not going to be playing for the team,
even funnier,
to making fun of probably the team's star player, not ideal. But
that's hilarious.
Yeah, I thought that was really great, and they deleted the tweet, so you can't find it now. But I'm sure you can't find it on Twitter, but you can find it.
When I'm editing this video, I'll make sure I find it. Don't worry.
You'll for sure find it.
I'll put it up.
All right, guys, and final topic for today. I thought this one was really, really cool. It's something kind of extremely interesting I have never seen before. Everton, this past weekend, brought out a virtual mascot. And for people that haven't seen, mascot here in this sense are the little the boys and girls that come out with the players. Everton brought out a virtual mascot for this boy named Jack McLinden. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but he's a boy who's suffering from, I don't remember the condition, but he's basically immobile. He's stuck in a hospital, can't move. So this virtual mascot actually allowed Jack to experience walking in as a mascot for Everton. Everton's captain brought him out front of the line. He got to see everything, experience everything, and it was the first ever virtual kind of mascot that's ever happened. I personally thought it was freaking awesome. It's a great little thing to not only to Jack, but kind of give kids the hope that even if I'm in the hospital. And I think that there's an organization behind it that is working to help children with the same condition. I'm sorry that I can't remember the exact condition, but maybe we'll put the link to the organization in the show notes to help these kids who are stuck in hospitals dealing with the kind of isolation. But yeah, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's super awesome to kind of give that hope to kids. I mean, I know in the United States, there's like Make-A-Wish Foundation and all this stuff like that, and I know like Nike does Dornbacher and all the cool designs that kids get to kind of participate in, and just to bring kids from a place where being a mascot as a kid and being a soccer fan is probably one of the most important things a kid probably could wish to do. So having a kid who never really thought he could be able to do that, I think it's amazing. I also was reading, like, just like on a lighter side, people were saying like, oh man, like, good luck getting like the Wi-Fi service to work so that kid can like walk around, because it's awful out here. But then they're like, nah, man, I'm in the stands right now and I have full Wi-Fi. And it's like, wow, they must have came in and brought a booster.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I think it's amazing what we can do with the power of technology today. You have a kid who is bedridden with a serious health condition. The fact that he can still somewhat live his dream by still being able to be a mascot, despite the fact that he can't move, that must have meant so much to him and his family. So to me, I think that is amazing. And I love it. I think that the fact that Everton did that is class. So kudos to you, Everton. Kudos to the organization that helped pull this off.
Well Child, I just looked it up. Well Child, and they help giving children with seriously terminally ill conditions kind of better living conditions overall. So
that's amazing.
Shout out to Well Child. That's really cool.
Kudos to them. Despite in terms of a weird segue, talking about mascots, I saw this video the other day, and it was really funny. And it was of the France team coming out to play in a match, and all the players had mascots, and N'Golo Kante's mascot. So like Alan said, these mascots are like little kids that are like, they get the chance to walk out with the players, and they stand in front of the players as they get a picture taken. There's this amazing video of the mascots lining up for France. In the France team, and in front of N'Golo Kante is a little boy who's probably his height, and so the video pans right in front of him, and the little kid's head is covering N'Golo Kante's face, and it's the funniest thing, because N'Golo Kante's not that tall, and this kid was just freakishly big, so it was like someone was panning across these players, and it was like, all right, tall player, short kid, tall player, short kid, tall player, short kid. And then you have N'Golo Kante being devoured by like this little kid, basically. It was so funny.
Yeah, I actually saw something similar with Lorenzo Insigne. I think it was Lorenzo Insigne for Napoli. He's a short guy, and they had a mascot that was actually taller than him, and he didn't stand behind them. So there's a picture of them. There's a picture of them, and he's standing off way to the side so that he can like be seen. And then it's just like, it was just some funny news. Like when they give you a mascot that's bigger than you, and Insigne's like way out of the picture awesome. During the national anthem. But yeah, so it's really great. They really don't think those things out that much, apparently. But
that's so funny.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the meat of the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about NASL.
So, the North American Soccer League is suspending its league in 2018. So, this is news that came out a few weeks ago, actually. They are basically suspending their league for 2018, and their future is uncertain as a result of their failed lawsuit against the United States Soccer Federation. As well as when that happened, several of their clubs jumped ship to the USL or to other divisions. So we figured it'd be a good time to talk about this current iteration of NASL's impact, its legacy, kind of its future, and what it's kind of been doing over the past few years. Especially because it was a league on the rise. It was garnering a lot of different foreign investment. They were getting a lot of different clubs interested. They were finally growing up to about 12 teams last year, so it was slowly starting to get a lot of interest. To give you an idea, Eden Hazard, along with he had a group of other players. They had invested in the San Diego team that was going to start playing in NASL. And so that was really interesting. They actually revealed the team name, too, and they were going to officially launch in 2018. It was going to be called San Diego 1904, which,
who knows?
Awful team name. It's really bad. Their logo was weird. But that being said, they had been teasing it out for over a year, and they finally unveiled it. And as soon as this team unveiled it, the league basically got into their legal issues with the USSF, and then decided they were suspending operations for 2018. And so, basically,
if you're wondering about the legal issues, we'll get into that later in the podcast. So if you're kind of holding on to your seat, tell us what it is. Well, we'll tell you at the end of the podcast. So
we'll tell you.
So the most interesting parts about NASL is that, so basically they were the second division in American soccer for the past about 8 seasons. About 8 seasons, they have been the de facto second division in America. And they basically wanted to create a league that was all of the things that MLS isn't or wasn't. And they kind of wanted to be the anti MLS. They had no salary cap. They didn't like how basically the MLS is very kind of treats all of its clubs like it's a dictator over its clubs. And
everyone wear Adidas.
Especially, actually, we were talking about before the episode. We were talking about how about when this episode comes out, about 2 weeks ago, they had the parlay jerseys for MLS, and it was really cool. The whole idea behind the parlay jerseys is phenomenal, but it ended up being very muted because every game on TV looked the same.
Every team was black and white.
Every team was black and white. You either played in a black parlay kit or a white parlay kit, and it's like, that's kind of probably not a very good example of how they try to command so much. But at the same time, it's just to illustrate that certain things just the MLS kind of dictates and teams have to follow. But basically, back to NASL, they wanted to step away from this idea of how the MLS dictates to its clubs, and they wanted to honor the tradition of past American clubs, because despite what a lot of Americans think, there is American soccer history. It's that thing where people will talk about American soccer like, oh, but we have no history, we don't do this. I mean, that's pretty true. There's lots of gaps within the American soccer history, but people seem to forget that America placed third in the 50s in a World Cup, and that America did have teams in the 70s. So it's like there are little gaps of actual history. And so NASL really wanted to honor that by essentially what they did was bring back a lot of these old clubs, like the New York Cosmos or the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, and what's the other Florida one?
Tampa Bay Rowdies.
Tampa Bay Rowdies. And so they basically wanted to bring all these clubs back and really honor the heritage of past American clubs. And they also had plans to input a pyramid of leagues that was essentially separate a little bit from the MLS, because the MLS has always been adamant that they don't want to have promotion relegation. So NASL was like, we're going to grow our league, and then we're going to add our own pyramid, and they wanted to have promotion and relegation. So basically, what happened and why didn't it work out for them? Before we dive into that, quick little history. Basically, they were founded in 2009 and began play in 2011 with 8 teams. And they used to use a split season schedule from April to early November, similar to how we're speaking about how Mexico does it, and with a 4-week break in July. And then the winner of the spring championship would play the winner of the fall championship in the Soccer Bowl, which is what we were talking about. The best name ever.
Yeah. My favorite name.
And so, that was just a little run through. There's not much to really say. It's a second division league, and
I think in terms of history, as a league, there isn't really much to say there. I think the interesting things for us to kind of discuss is that NASL as an idea really hits a lot of the check marks that we want kind of the MLS to transition to, right? This whole idea of accepting promotion relegation, not really having a salary cap. I mean, a lot of the quote unquote fixes that we think would really help the MLS out that NASL was trying to implement, but it just didn't pan out, unfortunately.
Right. They also were huge proponents of independent ownership, of allowing pretty much anybody to kind of come in and own a club and join the team. Whereas the MLS awards a city and an ownership group a team based on whatever criteria they decide. It's not as open.
Money.
It's a money system. It's not an open system for. It's not an open system, which is what NASL wanted to do. It's important to note that with the heritage aspects of this, that they did take the name NASL from the original North American Soccer League that ran between 1970 and 1985, which we've spoken about in the Portland Timbers and the Seattle Sounders episode. But they have no relation to that league. All they did was try and revive a lot of the team names and try and keep it very by trying to pay an homage to the original NASL. And so,
and I think too cool. Well, I think one thing that you mentioned was the fact that the NASL schedule kind of would even fit in with some of the fixes that we were talking about for the MLS in terms of the CONCACAF Champions League, right? They planned on partitioning, April to November, and then having a 4-week break, and then having another second part to the season. Another fix that we thought was something the MLS should implement. Yeah. So a lot of these things that we think would align US's league soccer more with the world, NASL was trying to create, right?
Yeah, NASL seemed to have implemented or taken a lot of the ideas from what other European leagues have done, tried and true leagues that, like, basically trying to take tried and true ideas that other European leagues have done in the past and to implement it in the U.S. And to me, a lot of people, at least to me, it seems that is a easy idea, right? It's like, let's take something that works over there and apply it here.
Right.
And it seemed to be working for them for a while until clearly it didn't. But I guess the point we should talk about is, do we think NASL had the right idea in terms of trying to be the anti-MLS?
Listen, I think they did. And this is coming from someone who I'm even currently not super involved with the MLS. Like, I'm not necessarily in love with the idea of it. I really like that it's growing so much. I like the idea more that the sport is growing a lot in the U.S., but there's still a lot of flaws, maybe with just the way that I perceive how a league should be. I still feel like the MLS is still very much so trying to be its own thing apart from the world sport. They're not really trying to fit in. They are very much so trying to be kind of its own Americanized version of the sport, which I don't personally enjoy. So do I like the idea of NASL? Absolutely. Like, just going over some of these points here, I think that they had the right idea in mind, and I don't want to see a salary cap. Sure, if one team gets overpowered, let it be. That's just the kind of the nature of the commerce of the sport. So I really think that they had the right intentions in mind. So it's a bit of a shame that it didn't work out for them. But I personally think that they were on the right track.
I think they were on the right track. They had the best ideas, but I think in order to sustain themselves, I don't think they should have been necessarily so against being against the MLS, because
they divided themselves way too much.
They divided themselves too much, and then that kind of set them on this path.
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't know if they were never like antagonistic against the MLS. They wouldn't actively go against them. All they said, what they basically set out to do was, we want to be different. They weren't like, we're going to try and attack you guys or do something against you guys. It was just a matter of like, clearly you guys don't want to accept us into your wheelhouse here by not accepting promotion relegation, so we're going to do our own thing. And then that was kind of how they wanted to do it. I think that in terms of salary cap, weirdly enough, I'm in this weird, my personal opinions on this are very divided, because while I commend NASL for what they wanted to do with, a lack of a salary cap, with a decentralized structure for the league. In other words, allowing independent owners to come in and have a board of directors which would all meet and decide things, is very different. I like how that was different. I loved all of that. But at the same time, I understand why the MLS needs to have a little bit more structure and a little bit more control to an extent, right? I think that for a fledgling league where you're competing against 4 other major sports, it's hard for you to sustain your growth without putting some restrictions on it so that it can be, a little bit more coddled and a little bit more it's the two sides of the sword, right? It's a double-edged sword. Sorry, I'm foreign.
Two sides of the same sword.
I'm foreign. I don't know all these expressions. It's a double-edged sword, right? You have on one hand the fact that by controlling and by having a salary cap, you allow this league to grow slowly, but at the same time, you end up creating this thing that a lot of people talk about, how American players are coddled, how the American league is coddled, and essentially the MLS lives in a bubble, how we've said. Especially like you mentioned, the MLS wants to live by itself and be its own thing. They don't want promotion relegation. They basically MLS's idea is to make it 30-something clubs do not have promotion relegation and exist as a league apart from everything else, which we've seen. I don't think that works for soccer. Soccer is such a global phenomenon. It's such a widespread thing that it has to be more connected with the rest of the world. I don't actually think that American leagues need to adopt everything that European leagues do.
I think that there has to be a good middle ground, right? And I'm not saying that I think necessarily that salary cap is like, needs to get rid of it, but I do think that that's an example of something that they're kind of sticking to, and it's that along with every other idea. It seems like you look at a league somewhere else in the world, you look at the MLS, and it's just completely different, right? So I think that there's just too much disparity in the way that the MLS runs itself compared to the rest of the world, which I don't enjoy.
What I think is very interesting about this is that I think that the reason NASL started to gain a lot of following is that when they stepped in, I think that the people in NASL viewed this issue of the MLS trying to coddle the league as something of the past. Because I understand MLS needing to coddle the league for the first, decade, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think that the MLS is at a point now that it could probably continue to grow without these restrictions, as exemplified by the fact that the MLS has adopted TAM and DP,
right.
and they are starting to make these new provisions to try and allow the league to grow. So in other words,
right.
the MLS is starting to see that they have to let up on some of these restrictions. Right. And I think that NASL, when they stepped in 2011, was probably the right time where they were like, you know what? Or maybe it wasn't the right time, but it was just before the right time to step in and go, let's have a league that doesn't have so many restrictions, because the sport in America is almost self-sustainable. And so I think that for them, they were counting on that idea of American soccer continuing on this trajectory without being coddled, without being protected.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing to think about, because a lot of the things that have transpired over the past year, or past 2 years actually, has been, I think, because of the same issue, where the MLS is starting to realize that there is a bigger hunger across the board for soccer, and that's where we start to get into the sticky situation of the legal issues. And so essentially what happened was, in 2015, NASL sent a letter to the U.S. soccer president, Sunil Gulati at the time, accusing U.S. soccer of antitrust violations should they adopt the proposed criteria for a sanctioned Division I soccer league. Because for a long time, NASL wanted to be a Division I soccer league right next to the MLS. Because they're like, all right, cool, you want to have your own thing? That's fine. We'll be parallel with you with our own league. And basically, what ended up happening was, what happened is the USSF, the United States Soccer Federation, what they were going to do is change criteria for Division I sanctioning. So in other words, it meant that they had to increase the minimum stadium size to 15,000, increase the minimum number of teams to 16, and change the minimum population required in 75% of the teams from a population of 1 million to 2 million. What that translates to is that for you to be considered a Division I soccer league, you had to have all of these things, which are a lot higher than they were previously. And so NASL was essentially almost on its way to being considered Division I up until these changes took effect.
Right.
Shortly thereafter, they were always sanctioned. They were always granted Division II status, but then the USSF essentially stripped that from NASL.
Yep.
Because the USSF claimed that NASL wasn't meeting up to even these Division II standards. They were saying that NASL didn't have the right size stadiums. They didn't have the right kind of, essentially all of these criteria.
They weren't even growing fast enough to sustain Division II level.
Exactly. And so both sides are essentially arguing with very fair points, right? The USSF was the reason they were changing the criteria is because by changing the criteria, it meant that the game was growing and it meant that other things could be implemented. In other words, they were trying to, progress the game a little bit. But what that meant was that they were essentially alienating NASL because they were the only other league that existed.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was they stripped them of their Division II status, and that's why NASL is not playing in 2018. As a result of this, NASL had 12 teams. 8 of their teams backed out because they're like, we are $1 million club, each of these, and we have salaries, because there's no salary cap, and they have salaries of incredible amounts that they weren't going to be able to pay. And so, meanwhile, while all of this is happening, the USL, which was the Division III of American soccer for a very long time, came to a historical agreement with the MLS. So it used to be MLS, NASL, and USL right below it. So then by USL and the MLS coming to an agreement where they basically became the amateur division. So in other words,
kind of development league.
Kind of like how the NBA has the G League, or how baseball has AAA, AA, single A, whatever those are. The USL essentially became that for MLS. And so these ideas of creating a pyramid with promotion and relegation, MLS was already starting to stamp out by doing these sorts of things. And so what happened was, when they originally granted Division II status to both NASL and the the USL. So then for about 1 year, both of these leagues operated as the Division 2, concurrently parallel to one another. And then MLS teams started to buy USL teams. So now basically a very large majority of MLS teams own USL teams.
Yeah.
Now. So you have like Seattle 2 and Toronto FC 2 and LA Galaxy 2 and
usually named in some standard like that, like
super boring,
not
super
giving
lame.
them any creativity whatsoever. But
and now this isn't actually unheard of because in Spain this is very common.
Yeah.
Every team in Spain has a B team that plays a few divisions below. But the way it works in Spain is very weird to me because I don't think that like Real Madrid B can actually
they can't actually go up.
They can't get promoted.
No.
And so they're basically forever stuck in the third or second division of Spain just because it wouldn't make sense for Real Madrid to have an A and a B team in the first division.
Imagine.
Yeah, and they usually play only youth. It's usually only youth players that kind of play in the anyways.
That or just like a player
injury,
who
like players come back from injury or something. You're usually
And so by that happening, what then NASL ended up accusing the USSF and MLS of doing is that essentially they're accusing the MLS and the USSF of coming together in a conspiracy to essentially wipe out NASL by creating a monopoly of clubs for the MLS. So think about it. If the MLS owns the top division of Division 1 and also owns a majority of the teams in Division 2, they own a monopoly on the sport.
Right.
And so there are two sides to this, of course, and it does seem a little fishy that all of these things kept changing and the USL agreement coming in, and it does feel a little bit like the USSF and the MLS were trying to basically wipe out NASL, which is sad because there were some NASL teams, like the New York Cosmos, were getting a lot of attendees to their games. There were a lot of people showing up to NASL games, and
but I think something that's you keep mentioning the other side is that the USSF, regardless of all of these claims that NASL makes, is repeatedly has made statements saying that NASL just isn't being truthful about their growth, right? That's been the problem, and NASL's been kind of deflecting that issue and that point by saying, whatever, you're still monopolizing the sport. So the two sides are the USSF is saying you're not being truthful, you're not growing that much, you're trying to get status for this either Division 2, Division 1, you don't belong there because you can't actually sustain that. NASL is deflecting that by saying, it's hard to have any growth if we're being shot down and not given an opportunity, right? So I think it's interesting, and I'd like to kind of get your opinions on, like, A, who do you believe here, and B, do you see anyone at fault for this, right? Do you think NASL, if NASL wasn't lying, were they really being screwed out of a deal like this? Or is there some way, should there have been more transparency as an issue? Or I want to get kind of your opinions on that.
I think that NASL was definitely reaching for something that they weren't ready to attain yet. I believe that they were making growth, but I think they might have reached too far for that apple that wasn't going to be there. And who's to say that if the USSF was like, fine, do what you want, and then turns out a couple of years, it's like, we can't actually do this. So, but at the same time, there is also the fact that it makes me believe that like MLS and USSF want to have their hands in every kind of aspect of soccer in the United States. And I don't believe that is very
it's a little
healthy.
Fishy. Yeah, and it's a little fishy just seeing kind of how they progressed.
Before we get to that aspect of it, because I do want to discuss whether or not we think that monopolization is correct or not. I think that to answer the question of who do I think is right, it's hard. I think Brennan made a huge point, is that they probably were reaching for something a little too fast. But what I want to point to is that the only thing that caused that league to fold was the fact that they were stripped of their sanctioning. Because when they got stripped of their sanctioning, that meant that you had teams with $1 million salaries, $1 million teams who just lost Division 2 status. And so I think that had that been left alone, this league would have been able to grow at its slow, steady pace, and it would have been what a lot of people might have wanted it to be, right? Because a lot of people want to support the MLS, but they don't like the silly rules. They don't like the funny money rules. They don't like the dictation from the
Right.
MLS onto these teams. So I think that NASL could have achieved that. Now, do I think that NASL was kind of using this lawsuit to deflect a little bit of their own blame? 100%. I think that they pursued this lawsuit so wholeheartedly because it was going after their central, everything that they were, their central identity. But at the same time, they probably weren't growing fast enough. They didn't have enough teams. And the truth is that the MLS had been picking off teams from NASL to essentially, quote-unquote, promote to the MLS, basically handpicking the best NASL teams and being like, ooh, you would be really good for the MLS, so we'll take you.
Well, how do you feel about the MLS changing its, or not the MLS, sorry, the USSF changing its requirements for having that Division I requirement, not only changing it at such a kind of suspicious time, but changing it to such a level, right? It went from to 15,000, and it was like 5,000 before. Like, it was a pretty big jump, I feel like.
It was a huge jump.
Something that to me, when I hear you say that, it was like, ooh, making it just out of reach enough where we could kind of get away with saying, well, this is where the sport is, but at the same time being like, we know you can't really reach this.
That's the biggest point, is the fact that the only other Division I league in America was the MLS. The only league that could attain that sanctioning was the MLS. The fact that the USSF essentially got scared, potentially, at the growth of NASL, and were like, oh, crap, guys, they're basically on their way of being another sanctioned Division I league. They were the only people trying to get there. So the fact that the USSF saw this and were like, oh, wait a second, we're going to change these rules to match only what the MLS can attain.
Right.
So it's almost like they did it because there was a threat to their dominance at the top of the pyramid.
Right.
And it wasn't like there was 3 other leagues vying for this. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if in the event that there were 3 leagues trying to vie for this Division I/Division II status, then I could understand the USSF changing its regulations and its criteria, right?
But only that one.
But the fact that there's only one league trying to attain this and actually doing a decent enough job, I'm not saying they were amazing. They didn't. There were a lot of things they didn't do correct. But the fact that there was a league that was essentially posing a threat, the only league posing a threat, and they changed the rules to alienate them, that's fishy.
Right, and I wonder, them changing, like them saying that NASL wasn't growing fast enough, was that was that relative to the MLS, or was it, and to the old kind of standard of what the Division I team had to be, or if that was according to this new standard, right? Because if it were up to the new standard, sure, I'm sure that NASL wasn't growing that quickly, because that, I mean,
it was a fairy tale criteria that they imposed themselves.
That they imposed, that they knew only the MLS would fit in. Whereas before, if the criteria were the same, had stayed the same, I'm sure that NASL, their numbers couldn't have been that off, where they were expecting that they couldn't still stay in that kind of what it was to be a Division I organization. I don't know. It's definitely sketchy. I mean, there's both sides. It's hard too, because there's that issue of transparency from both NASL and the MLS. Well, this is an issue we talked about when we did the episode on the USSF, lack of transparency from the leagues as a whole. We don't get all the information, right? We don't have the numbers. We can't say, I can't be like, well, I look at these numbers, NASL, they weren't lying. It's all just one side's telling us. It's like this it's a drama between leagues, when it really shouldn't be. It's for the betterment of the sport, I think.
Right.
But also at the same time, it's like 1 versus 1. It's like you said, there's no 3 teams. It almost seems impossible to not believe that setting that bar too high was not like vindictive in a sense. Right.
And I don't know.
So my question is, if left alone, if the USSF had not done this, is really the way I thought about this is if the United States Soccer Federation had not imposed this criteria, what was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean,
Put that out in your head, and that's where you can see where they were threatened by. Because if they had left it alone, there was a chance that NASL would have garnered a lot of following.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they would have folded on their own accord because they were biting more than they could chew. But at the same time, I personally think the USSF got scared because they probably thought it through and were like, shit. You know, there's a league here that's promising promotion and relegation, which is something that a vast majority of the people who follow the sport want, because it keeps clubs accountable. It's a democratic, open system. And they were like, sure, that's very far off. That's maybe 20 years in the future. but they were probably like, what can we do now to fix this?
And listen, the USSF is a rich organization. They know that, right? So they can kind of project out into the future. And we've seen it kind of being thrown into this mix of so much has gone into now for creating kind of local teams. So every city now seems to have kind of a local team that plays in the men's league. And to me, what that shows is that there is interest for these lower league teams. And if NASL had been able to stay afloat, I'm sure the Cosmos, a lot of these teams that have history, real history in the United States, they would have garnered more attention over the years. And having this resurgence of kind of supporting local football would have really pushed a lot of these teams to a level that could compete with the MLS. So I definitely see some scarcity. I mean, I definitely see why the MLS would be scared. But what I find interesting is why the USSF would try to shut down potentially another super competitive soccer league.
So my question is, why does it seem like the MLS and the USSF are so in bed with one another?
Yeah.
Because in every other country, you have the federation as its own independent organization over here, and over on the other side, then you have the leagues.
Yeah.
And yes, they work in commune. They are like a communal thing. They work together. But at the same time, they are independent organizations.
Yeah.
You shouldn't, like, the fact that the MLS has so much power over the USSF is scary. Like, it shouldn't be this easy for the MLS and the USSF to just, in front of everybody's eyes, be like, nah, we're going to do some sketchy shit.
Yeah. I'd say around the world, these kind of, like the USSF equivalent would almost be, they're criticized for not being involved enough. See, like Brazil, CBF, they have a whole host of issues that they don't deal with the Brazilian leagues. I mean, in this podcast, the FA making fun of Harry Kane, we see that like obviously they're not that intertwined. Like they're willing to still kind of take some risks. Obviously, that's a stupid little joke, but regardless, it seems like the USSF and MLS are so in bed with each other. Like they're one in the same, right? And I don't think that should be the case because you
have to have accountability.
Yeah,
you have to have, if a league steps out of bounds, you should have the federation there to fix it and course correct it, not essentially abet anything they want to do. But going back a little bit and kind of throwing a counterpoint to all of this, when NASL filed its lawsuit, some of NASL's clubs didn't know about this lawsuit and also didn't support it. So it's another issue that you could think about. Like, for example, 2 of their clubs said that they found out about the lawsuit over the telephone.
Oh, wow.
So in other words, it was like almost that situation of like, don't poke the bear, right? Had they just not filed the lawsuit and just kind of accepted that Division 2 status along with USL, or actually, I'm sorry, what ended up happening was that the USSF essentially then demoted NASL and said, oh, you can be Division 3. And that was what they kind of came back to NASL with when NASL started complaining about them stripping their sanctioning. So to give you a little recap, because I think we might have got a little confusing with it. So essentially, NASL at one point was trying to achieve Division 1 status. The USSF changed the criteria, in other words, bumped up the MLS to be the only Division 1 league. And then the USSF bumped up USL to being the Division 2 right next to NASL, and then a year later demoted NASL to Division 3.
Yeah.
And with that demotion to Division 3, NASL lost money because of that. It's a perception thing.
Yeah.
If you hear that a league is Division 3, you're like, who cares about a Division 3 league or whatever. A lot of the sponsorships backed out in NASL. 4 teams remained and 8 teams jumped ship. A lot of owners were a little upset. The amount of money they were going to make is going to be a lot less. And so that's when NASL decided to file the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And some of the clubs were kind of just like, why did you do that? Why did you poke the bear? You could have just left it alone. We could have continued operating as a Division 3. But then again, you have to think about the logistics. I don't think they could have actually continued operating as a Division 3 because of salaries, because of all these things. But
and that mentality kind of scares me. Like, you should be allowed to the bear here, right? You should be able to voice your kind of worries that you shouldn't be getting demoted, right?
Yeah.
This kind of poke the bear mentality is scary because, like, if you it's like that, oh, you don't want to go against the top the top guys they're going to be punished more than you are. You kind of want some justice, some equality. I don't know. It's tough. Again, it's tough not wanting to pick a side because you don't know all the information. You just end up sounding kind of foolish. But both sides equally, I think, equally as sketchy in this whole kind of debacle.
Who do you think is right in this, Brendan?
Oh, God. Honestly, I believe that the MLS should give NASL a shot.
At D1?
At D1.
Yeah.
Just give them a shot. I mean, like, honestly, if the MLS was growing at the pace it's been growing at, like, these crazy, like, last season was great. This season, I'm sure the attendance ratings are great again. Like, in the U.S., like, why is competition, like, isn't that what it's all about? Like, competition? But like,
and if the MLS were growing so fast, let it grow.
Yeah.
If something else is trying to kind of warrant that, it's that same issue of, like, we are a nation and a culture that is so in love with competition outside of our actually competitive sports, right? We baby the competitive sports. We don't want promotion relegation, anything. We want closed leagues. But we also claim that we want
you trying to come in and play with us.
We really want that kind of competitive culture, but we don't garner that kind of competition in our leagues, which I find
what's very crazy is that, like you said, if the MLS were growing so fast, why does it matter if NASL continues to operate as a Division II league? It doesn't.
But even so, give them the D1 title as well.
Yeah.
What are you so worried about?
And then what?
If you don't think
like then you start doing inter league play and just you have a new cup. It's ridiculous, man.
It's terrifying. So, to answer the question, do we think that the USSF intentionally tried to ruin NASL to benefit MLS and the USL?
Yes.
Wow. I think so too. I do think that.
And just given the history of, not to harp back on the USSF episode, when we did that, the kind of whole investigation, it's not transparent, right? And there seems to be kind of this lying in bed within the two leagues. We don't know why. I'd love to say that we have a president now that we're going to make the league more transparent. We do not. So I think it's going to kind of stay in that same direction, which is unfortunate. But, I mean, I don't know. I think we could have really seen some great things if we had two. Again, it's that same thing that you said. It's just a semantic. It's saying that you had two Division I leagues. Sure, it doesn't really matter. People would still see the MLS as a. I think the general population would still see the MLS as a Division I league.
Because even
because
I
there's
myself,
I
didn't know much about NASL.
Right.
And even if they were Division I, if anything, it might have just like, I can watch both leagues now.
Right. It's just like, and even then, like the MLS, I'm sure would have their same television deals, all of that. If they were growing as quickly as they were, it almost seems like if there was anything to be scared of, if there wasn't anything to be scared of, they wouldn't have done anything.
Right.
But there being them doing that, taking that step to kind of, raising the bar, like, to get on this roller coaster, you have to be 6 feet tall, not 5 feet tall anymore. That kind of step is really sketchy.
Yeah. I think that the only time this would have made sense was if the MLS had ever tried to establish promotion relegation. Because that's when, in reality, then you do need one league at the top of the pyramid. But the fact that MLS has been adamant from the beginning and to this day saying we will not have promotion relegation, it does not matter how many quote-unquote Division I leagues there are. It is irrelevant. It is ridiculous to think that by being scared of another Division I league, when you yourself have stated that you don't want to have a pyramid or level system, it makes no sense to me.
Absolutely.
They could have just been left alone to continue being sanctioned by the USSF, and nothing would have happened because, it's absurd. It's so crazy that this even transpired because why was the MLS so scared?
Yeah.
You see the MLS numbers. Teams are averaging, a lot of viewership every game. Their television deals are doing really well. Teams are doing really well. We're attracting a lot of good talent. Clearly, things are on the up for the MLS. Why were they so scared?
Right.
And why were they so scared to the point that they had to demote them to Division III? If they wanted to be like, you know what, we want to be the only Division I club or the only Division I league, let's let these two leagues operate as Division II. that's fine. Like, even then, I can almost be like, whatever, fine, leave it alone, let them be Division 2. But to then kind of strip NASL and say, nah, you can only play as Division 3 because we already have this Division 2 league, which is USL.
Right.
Which is sketchy because USL teams didn't all meet the criteria for Division 2 sanctioning. You know what they did? Basically, each USL team came out and said, we have a plan to reach it. And USSF was like, perfect, that's good enough. And you're like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, again, it's... Yeah, the poking the bear ended up really being something that hurt them. It's so unfortunate, man. It's like you want to see as much competition as possible, and then now you lose a league. You know, it's going to be years now, decades you could say, before like a league can really establish itself as the third division. If there were to be a real third division that's going to be competitive, and it just prolongs not only kind of the development of the sport here, but it prolongs that promotion relegation scheme, right? Because right now you have two leagues, like there isn't really going to be much movement there.
Especially when half of the teams in the top league own half the teams in the bottom league.
Right.
So I think one of the final questions we should maybe touch upon is, how concerning is it that it now seems that MLS clubs own and operate all Division 1 men's teams and all Division 1 women's teams, as well as a majority of Division 2 men's teams? If you listen to the NWSL episode we did, you know that a lot of MLS clubs now have ownership in NWSL clubs. Yeah. So in other words, the MLS now owns the top of two different pyramids, I guess, that they won't call pyramids, and also the Division 2 within men's.
Yeah.
How concerning is that?
It is relatively concerning, but I guess at the same time, if there's going to be just one central focus, why not just have one kind of governing thing, try to grow it as a whole?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's going to help grow both men's and women's and whatever team they do own, I think it's not the worst thing. But if NASL had still been its independent thing, I would say it'd be worse. But now that NASL's out, I think, like, it stinks to say, but
yeah.
No.
So, again, and we touch upon this, like, throughout this episode, the NWSL episode, like, it will sustain growth for right now, but it becomes an issue in the future when people start, and this will happen for sure, is people want to see that separation, right? When the women's team doesn't even have their own website separate from the men's team, something that we saw. When you start seeing that type of stuff, it starts getting really concerning because it really just becomes this boys' clubs of teams, right? And I don't mean to say boys' club as in like a misogynistic way. It just becomes this club of an elitist club of teams are going to be here forever. They're not going to be relegated. Live with it, die with it. There's
nothing to hold them accountable.
Right. There's no repercussions for being bad. There's no you're just here. If your owners are making money, they're happy. If they're not, then they invest. But there's no risk of failure, really, if we're being completely honest. So it's unfortunate because I do think in the future it's going to end up being very, very bad, and it's going to require some type of revolution, like almost type mentality to really to really get out of that. Get out of that situation. So I don't like. I think that right now it's doing the job of making sure that the sport is growing, both men's, women's, and youth, whatever it may be. But in the long haul, it's really going to be something that hurts U.S. soccer.
I agree with both of you. I think that you can actually see the dividends being paid right now in the short term for them owning USL. You know, you have I was paying attention on Facebook the other day of a lot of Atlanta United supporters. They make the trip to Atlanta United 2's games. So, in other words, a lot of the regular MLS supporters for Atlanta United, they go and support the USL team. And they had 6,000 people in their first game in their first season, which a lot of USL teams didn't. So, they are growing the sport, right? It really bothers me when it seems like there's a small group of people in charge of everything. And that is never good. If you look at history, if you look at how anything has ever transpired, you know that a central dictator kind of control doesn't work forever. It will work in the beginning. You know what I mean? I almost compare it to like communism. Communism worked great in the beginning.
And everyone's kind of honeymoon phasing it, and
it will go to shit if it continues to be this way. So I hate it. Of course, NASL had its problems. They clearly were, to an extent, using the lawsuit kind of as a smokescreen to take some of the pressure away from themselves. But at the same time, it does have a lot of truth to it. It's hard. This whole discussion of who's right, who's wrong, it's very difficult because both sides made amazing points, and both sides are essentially fighting for a very similar thing, which is fighting for the sport in America. But I don't know. I think that the sport in America actually ended up losing in the long run because I still don't see what would have happened if NASL had just continued to operate.
Yeah. Well, what could have been.
Yeah.
I think.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah. All right. I think that covers everything for today. It was a good discussion. Got a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Our blood is boiling not only because of the topic, but the room that we're in is very hot. But I think that's it for this week.
Another stupendous episode. Thanks for joining along the ride. NASL out. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Are they going to come back? We don't know. We hope so. I know it's been an emotionally driven ride for us today. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll get back to you. Until next week, we love you.